I cannot begin any journey without mentioning Karen Mann, whom a lot of you probably know. She was the inspiration behind my educational research and research into the feedback culture. And she asked me to speak to Chris, and the rest was history. So I'm going to talk actually about two specific issues which are very, very linked to feedback, but what comes from within, not from without. How can we establish the culture? How can we do something? How can the institution do something? But what can we as feedback recipients cultivate in order to seek, receive, accept feedback, and grow? Okay? I'm not going to go into the fact that this little kitten is seeing something very different in the reflection, but any idea who said know thyself besides me? Any idea? Just take a guess. Wild guess. I heard the answer there. Socrates. No, there, Shakespeare. Phew. No, Socrates, actually. And he basically said it. I mean, I think anything wise, if you just say Socrates or Plato, I mean, you know it's right. So he basically said people make themselves, well, he didn't say it in English probably, but people make themselves appear ridiculous when they are trying to know obscure things before they know themselves. So with that, let's just move on to feedback, and this is the definition I'm going to work off of. Feedback should be viewed from a learner perspective, or in other words, a recipient perspective. It's effective only when it's assimilated and leads to behavior change. So I'm going to look at Chris, described this elegantly in his research about the concept of credibility. Credibility can be looked at from the recipients, from relationships between providers and recipients, from provider and the context and culture. But I'm going to focus on the recipients a little bit. In order to know thyself, one must be open to feedback. Which brings me to my number one big bullet, big ticket item, as they say. Self-awareness. So this is a model described by two psychologists called the Johari window. Sounds quite fancy, but really it is about awareness of behaviors in therapeutic interactions. And I thought this applies so well to feedback conversations. So on the side, when you look at, is your behavior, is my behavior known to myself and known to others? Mix and match, we develop 4 windows. So if you start off with the top left, a behavior that's known to me and known to you who are observing me is called the known quadrant. This is great. Frequently, it's validating feedback, reinforcing feedback, attends to the positive phase, everyone goes home and lives happily ever after. Fantastic. But then you move to the top right. These are behaviors I have no clue about. And we know from our own experiences that our awareness of our behaviors is not sometimes up to par. There are things we have no idea that we do. I have no idea about some things I'm doing right now, but you do. So it's unknown to self and known to others. And that is a blind quadrant. And this is an area that can be revealed with feedback, especially in the context of a conducive feedback provider-recipient relationship. And feedback seeking is a big part of this. The more we seek feedback, our blind spots get decreased. Moving to the bottom left, there are things we know that we do, but others don't see it. That's hidden. And why is this important? Self-disclosure. I am afraid of, I am challenged by, I think I stink at this and I'd like help. And again, relationships come back into the equation. The more comfortable you are with a person, the more likely we are with self-disclosure. And finally, the bottom right, unknown, unknown. I have no idea, you have no idea. How does this come to light? Over time, with a mindset of self-discovery and multi-source feedback. And this is how feedback fits into all 4 quadrants of this therapeutic interaction model called Johari window. So self-awareness, number 1. And then the kitten will actually see itself as a kitten and not so much as a tiger. The next thing I wanted to introduce was mindset. Mindset comes out of another psychology. You must be wondering, what is a general internist doing talking about psychologists? Fabulous stuff. They wrote the best things, I think. Mindset, Carol Dweck. She is a psychology professor based at Stanford University. And she did a lot of observations on kids, actually, school kids, age 6 to 10. And her observations led to some fascinating work. So as a group of kids were given complex problems that they could not solve, and she found there were some that were more and more and more enthusiastic as the problem got harder and harder and harder, and kept working and working at it. And there's another group of kids that basically threw everything around, and what she said, exhibited maladaptive behaviors, stopped learning. Based on those behaviors, she described 2 mindsets, a fixed mindset and a growth mindset. And in terms of feedback and traits in ourselves that allow us to seek, receive, accept feedback, and grow, we all need a growth mindset. And sometimes I think our educational, in health professions education, we really inculcate more of a fixed mindset. How do you perform? How do you appear to others? The high honors and summative judgments. So let's relate this to feedback. Growth mindset fosters the following behaviors. The focus is on learning, not so much on my talent, my innate talent. The focus is, because of this focus, these people will seek feedback. I want to know my faults. I want to know where my deficiencies lie because I want to grow. Mistakes I make are a learning opportunity. It's exciting. I can learn new things. And that also makes us accept and incorporate constructive feedback. Therefore, we engage in behavior change. The fixed mindset, on the other hand, the focus is so much on how we look to others, the image. And I think it's your work as well, right? The feedback, playing the game a little bit, performing when others are observing our performance. Like there is a game, playing the game, and then even in the business school world, they've talked about it, shopping for confirmation. Okay, staging a performance. The mistakes are a threat, big threat to self-image, and reject constructive feedback. So what are the implications? There are individual implications, relationship implications, and institutional implications. And I think this was mentioned this morning, co-learning, right? And so we called it co-construction or co-creation. So what are the implications for teachers and learners? Our learners are all adult learners. So we really need to be sitting with them and creating learning opportunities, constructing feedback conversations, creating or designing action plans together. So if you look at this, we came up with this model in our 12 Tips article. I think that's the one you discussed last year. So you start here, where there's establishment of learning goals, direct observation of performance, then followed by feedback conversations, facilitated reflection, which I think Joan Sargent and her colleagues wrote about, collaborative action plans, co-creation of learning opportunities. So how will we implement these action plans? What's next? How do we know this works? And then re-enter the cycle by formulating new goals. And right in the middle, I said, learners, as much as learners initiate these plans or this whole loop, and teachers facilitate, we are then leading them towards independent practice and making them reflective practitioners. So this is something that teachers and learners can do together. Relationships kept coming up all the time, and here it is, a prime demonstration of how relationships can work. This is my last slide, and essentially this talks about looking at feedback culture through 4 lenses. One is the feedback providers, feedback recipients, feedback relationships, and the institutional context. So starting with feedback providers, rather than how do I give feedback, perhaps we need to be looking at how can I establish a psychologically safe learning climate? How can I facilitate reflection amongst my learners? How can I engage in informed self-assessment? From the feedback recipients, rather than how can I hide from my mistakes, it's like how can I develop a growth mindset and develop a learning goal orientation. My goals are to learn rather than performance, and then increase my self-awareness. In terms of feedback relationships, forming those educational alliances, and then again, I think Chris mentioned and Shifra talked about too, we need a culture which will allow these alliances to flourish. Feedback discussions, make them goal-directed rather than, oh, how was last year? How about that interaction you had with a patient 2 months ago? You did a rotten job. Let's talk about this today. No. And co-creation of action plans, which we talked about. And finally, institutional context, which is much more of a continuous improvement mindset, which means right from the top, we all have strengths and deficiencies, and here are disclosures, mistakes we've learned from, and we continue to do that. And the more people in authority do that, the more learners will be willing to engage in that. Focus on growth and a safe psychological culture.